welcome. Today we are going to be taking a look at the orchestration of the most moving moment in classical music. Let's begin. So the melody is being carried by 6 French horns and 4 string sections. This creates a massive thick sound as we have potentially over 60 string players and 6 French horn players, all playing mezzo forte. So let's look at the chords. All the chords are simple diatonic triads, which is quite remarkable considering how emotionally moving this section of music is. So the actual triads are being played by 3 clarinets, 3 bassoons, and both harp, with the bass line being played by bass clarinet, contrabassoon, and pizzicato double basses. Now these pizzicato double basses are crucial as they make the bass line stick out compared to the overwhelming amount of melody players. So moving on to this page, which has a lot of staves, but don't panic, this is still very simple stuff. Here, these 4 bars remain about the same. It's only once we get to about here, this is where things change up a bit, as the main change is this horn counterpoint. And this horn counterpoint really opens things up and is a real tearjerker, because it's so simple yet so beautiful. In order to compensate for the lack of 6 French horns playing the melody, we have all 3 clarinets joining in, and also the first trumpet helping out as well. And the strings are also still playing, although note that the cellos are now playing treble clef, so they're playing very high, which means they are going to stick out a lot and help compensate for the lack of French horns. So let's take a listen to that. I know that was quite a bit of talking, but if you are still listening, that means you have a good attention span, so you probably enjoy classical music already. To the second main section here, which is actually a repeat of the original melodies and chords. They are now just orchestrated slightly differently and slightly larger. The strings are now playing in octaves, the violins playing the top octave, and then the violas and cellos playing the bottom octave. And I think this was mainly done because the cellos just can't really play this high, and the violas are able to help support them. So now we have all of the bassoons playing the bass line, along with now arco double basses, which were made arco here to help add some more weight. And this makes the bass line quite thick, but not overpowering, as it's mostly wind instrument still. So the horns are now playing the chords. And you may think, 6 horns playing chords, wouldn't that really stick out? And the answer is sort of, but not really, because they aren't constantly in unison with each other. So they more act as a very nice and stable pad, which is a contrast to the first trumpet, which is now playing this almost cut up melodic line, which is meant to support the melody but also contrast it. Sort of like a counter melody, but very, very simplified, which is not at all like a nice soft pad. This trumpet creates a lot of dissonance and beautiful moments, and is meant to stick out at least a little bit. So moving on to this page, everything is about the same pretty much. The first trumpet drops out here, which just leaves the strings and clarinets playing anything melodic, and they are able to actually remain quite audible, very, very fine, and still very much in the foreground. They're all, well, mainly the cellos are once again playing quite high, which is going to make it all stick out quite a bit. There's one thing about strings is that when they're playing in their higher registers, they will naturally sound louder and sound more intense. And with cellos, this is actually quite perfect because their higher range would be considered the more middle range for, say, violins, which will allow you to play a more mid-range melody, but in a more intense way. One thing to note here is that the harps by this point are going to be slowly drowned out more and more, as harps can only project so much, and in this certain section it can't really start playing double forte, say, because that will make them stick out a little bit too much. So past this point, the harps are going to just disappear into their own little world. Let's take a listen to that, those last however many bars, and then we'll move on to this big forte section, which sounds really epic. Look at the changes here. So first of all, the horns are no longer playing the chords, as that sort of pad has now gone on to the trumpets. The trumpets aren't quite as soft as a pad, but we are going from 6 to 4, so the overall dynamic level is going to be about the same because trumpets are more powerful than horns. The voicings are going to change a bit here, going from 6 instruments to 4, but it still is able to fill everything out very nicely. So the woodwinds get expanded now as we have 2 flutes, 3 oboes, and English horn now helping out with this melody. And this melody is now in forte, same with all of the other winds, the double basses. And this transition to forte works twofold. First of all, it adds momentum and helps propel this section forward, as now things are getting more intense, more heart-wrenching, and louder. And secondly, we're introducing a lot more louder instruments, mainly the heavy brass. As all 4 trumpets are now playing, bass trombone has now joined in to the bass line, as well as the timpani. And this really pushes things forward and makes the bass line sound warmer. But all of these louder instruments being added, even though they're only at a mezzo forte, it still makes it imperative for everything else to become more expressive and more dynamically charged now. I just made up that term, but it sounds cool. And this dynamic contrast really helps keep things balanced and keeps the momentum going. So this remains about the same until we get to here again. This is where the counterpoint comes back. In the horns, the first trumpet plays the melody again, but this time it's not a solo and it's playing mezzo forte compared to the forte strings and forte winds. So it should be more background now. that's not necessarily the case, because it's still a trumpet, and even a trumpet playing at mezzo forte can still pack quite a punch. And in the recording which I am using for this, it actually more sounds like it is playing forte, but I think it is just trying to balance, but yet it kind of ends up sticking out. It sounds perfectly fine. It's just one of those things. And this is the thing about live music. It's organic. It's played by real people. Like, each of these staves is not just a track. Like, this stave is flutes, 2 flute players. These are 2 people playing the same line. Oboe, 3 oboe players playing this line. These are real people, real living human beings with their own dreams, their own desires, and their own experience with playing instruments. And you can't forget about that. Unless, of course, you are writing basically exclusively for digital music. Fair enough, but still, taking these things into account, you can make more realistic music. Anyways, this trumpet sounds pretty cool. Timpani players are really rocking it here. And let's move on to this page, which is where things get real, as we have this amazing build-up. Like, this build-up just is something remarkable. How do I explain why? So, this is the second time that we're hearing this specific melodic theme being repeated here. So we know what is going to come next. We just don't know how it is going to sound exactly. This entire section was building up to this massive full orchestra climax. But I'm kind of getting ahead of ourselves, so before we actually look at this, let's take a listen to the last 16 or so bars, or 8 bars, and I will talk about all of this, which is remarkable. So let's start with this bar here. And mainly we have the dynamics changing from forte to double forte, or fortissimo. And here we have all of the heavy brass being engaged. So all 4 trumpets, all of the tenor trombones, and the strings, of course, are now trying to cover as much space as they can. And of course the winds are doing basically exactly the same thing as before. And the really cool thing here is that all 6 horns come back playing that same melodic line which they started with, now at double forte. So all 6 of these horns really stand out yet blend in at the same time, as they're dominating their own octave, which I believe is shared with the cellos, but you know, shared because we have 6 horns with 1 cello group, so the cellos can only do their best here, but still. Anyways, let's look at the more emotional parts of this, which is mainly this bar here, where our expectations get subverted because this chord doesn't land immediately. It actually waits a beat before just... And a good orchestra, in my opinion, would really emphasize this, really make this obvious, and maybe even slow down a bit here to just make it clear that this is a really good difference, and not necessarily needed variety, but very welcome variety compared to the last 2 versions of this section of this melody. So from here, we basically just do that same thing again, except for this last chord here, which involves the flutes, oboes, and clarinets splitting apart, creating this B flat sus4 chord, which would be the 5 sus4 chord in E flat major. The brass also splits apart, making this chord even more obvious, even more in your face. The timpani does this very satisfying roll, as this roll adds a lot more weight to it, which is a lot better than just doing a simple stroke. And if we look here, we can see the strings also spread apart, going to their more default ranges, still sounding great, with the first violins basically dominating because they are really pushing it now. Like, they've gone pretty high. There we go. Let's listen to that, and then I'm going to talk about why this is so moving with proof. In my opinion, the reason why this section of music is so emotionally moving is because it's able to take a simple idea, a simple melodic idea with a simple chord progression, and expand it into something huge using only orchestration. Just think about it. The actual melody, like, it doesn't even change throughout the entire section until the very end, where it just stops. And the same with the chords too. The chords stay the exact same. In fact, I'm pretty sure the double basses essentially play the same thing 2.5 times, because that's how many times this is repeated. But with each time it gets like larger and larger, more powerful. And that has a profound effect on our brain of just hearing the same thing, the same already satisfying, already beautiful idea being expanded again and again until it hits that devastating climax, that amazing climax. As proof of this, this piece, Jupiter by Gustav Holst, which is where this section comes from, this specific choral has been used countless times, or referenced countless times within popular culture. And I'll put up some examples right now.
Our second hymn is a patriotic anthem sung to the music of Gustav Holst.